problem.
Alright, have fun.
Okay, welcome guys to the weekly meetup. Glad to have a bigger turnout than usual here. So I guess I'll cover some of the stuff that's been going on this week and what's going to be upcoming, and some other things that are going on. So this week we've been working on a lot of features for the forum. We've been trying to improve it, get it ready for some real-world adoption, real-world use. We've had a lot of newcomers come into the forum, so eos-forum.org, try it out, and you're able to post anonymously, and people have been using that feature to try and test the forum out and sort of get a feel for it. And overall, it's looking pretty good. So some features that we have that are upcoming this week, most likely, are I'm going to start focusing on the self-moderation tools. So I mentioned this before in our general channel where we discuss the project. So two moderation tools that are going to get introduced are the ability to ignore specific posts and the ability to ignore a specific user. Now, when you ignore a specific user, it's going to hide threads that are created by that user from you. And if you're viewing a thread that that user has posted in, it's not going to hide their post entirely. It's going to have their post automatically collapsed. So you will be able to uncollapse it and still see what they were saying if you want to. So it's very similar to how on a lot of subreddits on Reddit, if you are downvoted enough, your comment is automatically hidden. So, and you'll of course be able to unblock people as well. So at this time, this is a self-moderation tool. It is not going to be possible this week at least to proxy and have somebody else moderate for you. So these are strictly self-moderation tools that are getting introduced. Some other updates that are coming out that were delayed to work on some other stuff are bios. So I mentioned, like before, we're going to have like a snippet of text that you can put into your profile, very similar to the small description that you get on like a platform like Twitter. And one of the use cases we see for that is being able to put other cryptocurrency addresses into your profile, or other things that you can use to cryptographically identify yourself, for example, like a PGP key. Another feature that we are looking to introduce that would be kind of cool is to have signatures on the form. So that's to have a piece of text that automatically gets inserted at the end of all your messages. And we want this to be an updatable field. So when you change your signature, it'll change even for posts that you've already made. And so the way that's going to work is it's going to be using the off-chain state concept that we previously posted a Medium article for. So what that allows you to do is it allows you to store certain data off-chain, but it's updatable data, so it's very similar to RAM in that sense. But since a smart contract doesn't need access to that data, we can get away with not storing it in RAM. Some other features that we're working on are anonymous identities associated with the Anon account. So for some of you guys who have maybe tried posting on the forum, you've seen before you get like an anonymous identity number that's specific to you, and occasionally that number will change. So what we want to do is we want to introduce pseudo-anonymity, where you can sort of generate an identity, and then you'll be able to use that identity, for example, on different devices or different EOS accounts, and you'll be able to post from the anonymous account while maintaining the same anonymous identity. So if you ever want to like abandon, let's say, one anonymous identity and move to another one, you can just arbitrarily generate them. And that'll be cryptographically verified by using signatures and stuff. And that leads me into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is we are going to introduce Atmos tipping into the forum. So this relates into the comment and that we had in the original spec, which talked about being able to pay for upvotes in Atmos. So the way that's going to work is when if you want, after you've upvoted someone with your regular upvote, you can then choose to upvote them again. And by upvoting them again, you're going to be paying a certain amount of Atmos for the upvotes. And you choose how much you want to pay, essentially. And half of that will end up going into a holding account. That's essentially a DAO fund for the Novasphere project. And so at this point in time, we don't exactly have a specific goal in mind as to what we're going to be doing with that. So you can sort of look at it as burned funds. So if the community decides later on that, hey, actually we want to burn these funds that are in the proposal or are in the DAO account rather than use them for anything, we can always do that. So instead of going with the original concept of burning them, we're going to be sending them to this DAO holding account. So that'll allow for people to actually start earning some Atmos just from posting quality content on the forum. And then a feature that we're going to look to introduce later on, so not quite this week, but sometime in the near future, is being able to tip to the anonymous account, but to a specific anonymous identity. So it'll allow you to receive tips essentially anonymously without even having an EOS account. Another thing that we've introduced is we recently revamped our night theme, and we made it a little more closer to the colors that are used in the Atmos logo. And one of the requests that we've gotten before is to have a day theme on the forum. So there's going to be a toggleable menu soon in settings where you can switch between 2 night themes and 1 day theme. And I think that roughly covers most of what I have planned for what's upcoming this week. Now, some of the things I wanted to go over was some of the suggestions that were posted on the forum and sort of give my thoughts on that. So I'm going to link the thread here in the meetup chat so you guys can look at it while I'm looking at it. And give me 1 second. Okay, so let's take a look through this, and I'll more or less summarize what the idea is, and I'll give my thoughts on it. So let's see what we have here. So somebody mentioned this idea for having private subs on the forum. So in practice, this is technically possible. I just don't know how practical it'll be in the sense that there's a few ways to go about it, which is the first way is either there can just be a secret, essentially, to be able to read the data in the sub. But the problem with that approach is if any member in the sub decides to leak the secret, it's like, okay, well, then what do you do? So another solution to that is to have an initial owner of the sub, very similar to how Reddit works, and allow them to be able to change the secret of the sub so that if it gets, let's say if it gets leaked, the owner, quote, quote, of the anonymous sub can then change the secret, and then people will be stop being able to eavesdrop. Now, the problem with that, though, is still if the old secret gets leaked, it means that anything that's been posted to that sub is now then visible to the public. So I'm not really sure how good of an idea having private subs are, because I think that there's a lot of problems and risks involved in this. I feel like private subs might give people a false sense of security in terms of posting certain things on the forum. So it's not to say that it's necessarily impossible, but I'm not really sure how much I agree with this idea in practice. Well, we can talk about the solutions for for this in a sec. Let me just get through the rest of the stuff that's mentioned here. So somebody did mention in this thread, having the burned Atmos instead help fund the EOS form, a non-account. And that this post here is the one that gave me the idea about having the Atmos get sent to a DAO holding account for the time being instead of outright burning them. So kudos to whoever posted this. That guy's awesome. Definitely something I agreed with that I hadn't previously considered. After I read this post, more or less the thought process I had, Will, is if you think about it, EOS at this point in time has the 4% worker proposal fund. But since it's locked up in this holding account, there's really technically only 1% inflation happening in EOS right now because we don't really know what's going to happen with that 4%. If the community decides that they want worker proposals, then okay, technically there's been 5% inflation this whole time, but otherwise, if they decide, set the whole thing on fire and burn it all, then there's really only been 1%. So, yeah, great suggestion with that. So, this person here suggested an idea for the forum about an anonymous all sub, and it basically will aggregate posts that are in the anon subs. Pretty cool idea. Yeah, I might look to introduce that. It's rather simple to add, actually. So that might be something I consider adding in this week's updates. Not a bad idea. Now, another suggestion that the same person mentioned is a scatter-free account system where you can just enter your key into the form. That is something while it wouldn't be difficult to do this, it's not something I want to implement because it encourages users to take a rather concerning security risk. Now, because of how EOS works in terms of permissions, it is possible to make this security risk very, very minimal. But the problem with that is that there aren't very good faces at this point in time, and to manage your security settings in terms of keys, and I feel like this concept in terms of having multiple keys and that sort of thing, a lot of people will have a difficult time understanding that at this point in time because there aren't really good tools to deal with it. So it's an idea that we might consider in the future, which is having a posting key, as Fixed mentioned in the meetup chat. But it's not something within my short-term plans. So let me be taking a look through this thread. So somebody mentions a new name for the forum. So that's something that we've been discussing, is a more generic name for the forum that's not centered on EOS itself, sort of like a brand name. But we haven't really thought of anything concrete at this point. So if you have ideas, feel free to toss them out to us. So somebody mentioned collapsing posts to make them more readable. So the person, there's a person who responded to them who said you can click the permalink of a post, which helps do that. This is more or less very similar to how you have to deal with it on Reddit. The way Reddit does is it actually stops loading comments after a certain threshold, and you basically have to click a show more. And when you click show more, it basically takes you to the permalink of the post. So I think that's an okay solution for the time being. One person mentions signatures, and that's already something that we have planned. So some great suggestions in this thread. I'm liking what I'm seeing. And I really appreciate the feedback that everyone's offered to us in terms of suggestions and how we can improve the forum. So let me answer some of the questions that I've gotten in the chat while talking about this. So Red Crypto asks a question about Atmos D, which is the sidechain version of Atmos, the off-chain token. So he asks, if you don't have an EOS account, you can't send it. Is that correct? So no, that's actually not correct. You can use the off-chain tokens without having an EOS account, because once you create the off-chain token transaction and you've fully signed it, anyone with an EOS account can broadcast it to the EOS blockchain. And so if you have an account, you can broadcast it yourself. Otherwise, you can use a service that's willing to take a fee, and the service can broadcast your transaction for you. And we, the Novasphere team, will be running a service to allow for this. And so funds that are accrued from that service will also go into the DAO account. But it is possible for other people to set up services as well. So it's not reliant on strictly us. So Fixed says in the meetup chat a suggestion. He says, how about a reply box instead of a new window so you can see the post you are replying to? That is actually something I had thought of, forgot, and now I was just reminded of. So yeah, a lot of forums in the earlier days, the more traditional forums, they typically had a feature called Quick Reply. And that sort of just inserted a text box where you could type in easy message and then hit post rather than going to like a more fancy editor. So that is actually something that I plan to do in this week's updates. Thank you for reminding me about that. So it'll work very similarly to how it works right now on Reddit. When you click a reply, you'll get a small box below the post that you're replying to. So Road Crypto brings up a point about private subs and how current cryptography in regards to that isn't the greatest in terms of being quantum resistant. So I think one of the things that we should consider doing is starting another discussion thread to sort of carry the private subs discussion over there, because it's definitely not something I've entirely ruled out, but it's something we have to think about in terms of how to approach and what risks are involved there, because the last thing that we want is to give people the false sense of security and people to be posting things in a private sub and then, oops, it's no longer private. So Fix asks, is there a possibility of being alerted to replies to your posts or your comments, like visually? So this is a difficult one to think about, because the way that normally works is you usually have a central server that keeps track of that sort of thing. So I'm not gonna say it's entirely impossible, because there might be a few creative ways to actually implement this without having a central server. So I'm gonna think about it, and I'll get back to you on that if I can come up with an approach as to how to handle alerts. Because I do think that if we can have alerts, it definitely would help a lot. But the last thing I want to introduce is centrality into the system, where you have a server that has to keep track of certain data specific to your account, and that is information that only that server knows about you. Because, in my opinion, that's not a good thing. I feel like if you were to connect to any server, it should have the exact same information that the other Novasphere DB server has. So I guess while you guys are typing in the chat, I'll cover something else that got brought up. I was having a discussion on the forum with someone about having a pure browser solution for self-hosting. And I'll put the thread in the meetup chat so you guys can read it if you want. And more or less, a pure browser solution is really not feasible at this point in time because the main drawback that you would run into is the fact that browsers do not handle or allow for large amounts of persistent data. So the biggest problem you would have is every time you would open, let's say, the page for the first time, it would have to sort of rebuild the entire database, and that could be a very time-consuming thing as the data set continues to grow. But not only that, it could consume a large amount of bandwidth on the initial startup of the form, so that would make it even less mobile-friendly. Now, on the other hand, in Thread, I did talk about if there was an app introduced, apps on mobile devices or even tablets have access to the SD card, or basically what is disk space. So that is one potential solution as to how this could be implemented. Although we would need to refactor some of the code which relies on the MongoDB database system at this point in time to use something that is more easily hosted on the fly. Like, for example, Google's Lovefield database, which is a database that can run entirely in the browser. So if you guys have any other questions about the what's going on in the project or anything related to the project, I can answer those now. Otherwise, there is one last thing I want to talk about at the end after I've covered the questions, which is the lie of decentralization in cryptocurrency space and how this buzzword gets tossed around way too often. So Road Crypto asks that WebTorrent thing I posted can be integrated somehow. What are you referring to when you say that WebTorrent thing? You mean like WebTorrent videos? Oh, so Road Crypto put a link to BitChute. I'll take a look at it and I'll let you know. I can't give you a conclusive answer at this point in time because I honestly don't know. I have to learn a bit about the platform and see how it works, and maybe it's possible. Okay, well, I'll take a look into it and I'll let you know. Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. I'll take a look into it and I'll see how difficult it is to implement, and it could be a pretty cool addition to the forum. It reminds me of one thing I actually recently implemented that's sort of discreet, which is if you post a link now to a YouTube video, it'll automatically transform the link into the embedded content. It's not really something that's particularly difficult to do. So So any other questions pertaining to the project that you guys wanted me to go over, or suggestions? So Fix asks a follow-up question relating to the notifications. Again, it's something I'll think about that might help. But I'm sure if I think about it a bit, I might be able to come up with a way to implement notifications. The way it would essentially have to work, just off the top of my head, is I'd have to store the most recently seen post or like notification in local storage, and then compare that to something that comes from querying the data set. You can already actually reskin the form to your own personal preference by supplying your own style sheet, but you have to go to the raw settings, and then you can put a link to a style sheet and actually just hit save, and that'll work. But there's going to be an easier interface to do that in the next update. Yeah, so let's talk a bit about decentralization. So, when I think decentralization, I think that you have to have two goals in mind. And those two goals are you're trying to make something that's trustless, which means you're trying to remove counterparty risk. So to clarify what counterparty risk is, for example, for anyone who might not know what it is, when you give a bank your money, you're exposed to counterparty risk because if that bank goes bankrupt, then your money's gone. So that's a really good example of counterparty risk and why a lot of cryptocurrency folks tend to say the phrase, be your own bank. Now the second thing in mind that comes to my mind when it comes to decentralization is censorship resistance. So that ties exactly in with a permissionless system. You don't need someone's permission to use the system. You can use the system and nobody can stop you from using the system. If I want to send someone a Bitcoin transaction, I don't have to ask anyone for permission to send that Bitcoin transaction. I can just send it to the network and it gets processed. Further, nobody can stop me from being able to send that transaction to the network. So these are the two things that I have in mind when I think decentralization. Trustless, censorship resistance. So let's talk about why this word gets thrown around a lot, and people have really bad understanding of what's decentralized and what's not. So let's start with this. Just because it's on a blockchain does not mean it's decentralized. So to give you a really good example of this, we have ERC20 tokens in Ethereum. Now, all ERC20 is it's an interface. And so what an interface is it says that this contract implements certain functions, and that's it. It doesn't tell you anything about how those functions work and the underlying mechanisms of them, or the other functions that might exist in this contract. It just tells you that the functions required for the ERC20 standard exist. Now, there's a lot of tokens in Ethereum. I'm going to put a reference link here. This is just something I found straight off of Google. So there's a ton of tokens in Ethereum that are not decentralized. And what I mean by that is these tokens can be frozen, contracts can be paused, and they're not permissionless. So, for example, say you own a token, one of these ERC20s. The developers, for whatever reason, decide to pause that contract. Well, it's like your bank just took a holiday. You no longer have access to your quote-quote money, quote-quote. So there's a huge centralization risk around what the person who has the authority to pause the contract does with it. And not only that, but some of these contracts have the ability to freeze certain addresses. So maybe you received money or these tokens from a questionable source, an address that was known to be involved in some illicit activity, whether that's been proved or not. So this ties into the lack of fungibility that we have on Ethereum and Bitcoin. And because there isn't fungibility, certain addresses can be discriminated against. And when I say discriminated against, I mean they can be frozen. And so again, this is really no different than, let's say the bank, chooses to freeze your account and you can no longer transact from it. Right? I mean, typically speaking, the bank lets you transact, freely as you please, but that doesn't make the bank decentralized. So, again, this heavily ties into what I originally said. Just because it's on a blockchain does not mean it's decentralized. And a lot of people make these assumptions that they see something built on a blockchain, they instantly assume it's decentralized. That is not true. Even if the underlying blockchain itself, you consider it to be decentralized. If you consider Ethereum to be decentralized, just because a dApp is built on Ethereum does not mean that dApp is decentralized. And a lot of people lack the skills necessary to audit the code of these contracts and have the technical grasp to see whether these services or these contracts or whatever are decentralized. So, to give you another example, there are several decentralized exchanges, if you can even call them that. And I won't say any specific names, but what I mean is they call themselves decentralized exchanges, and the reality is they're not. Because what ends up happening is you are sending your accounts to a custodian account, and the custodian account is what matches your orders get matched off chain. So they will toss the claim out there that you can audit it, quote quote, by checking the blockchain. But it's really, who's going to go through the process of manually building an order book to see if they actually got the optimal trade that they were supposed to? So you don't know how their software is matching those orders, for example, because that's all being done off-chain, and you have no way of actually validating it because the tools to validate it aren't even open source. So that in itself is a problem. But even a bigger problem than that is by sending your tokens to these custodian accounts, these custodian accounts can be hacked, and that shouldn't be the case, right? Again, going back to what decentralized should mean, it should mean trustless, right? Why can a decentralized exchange be hacked, right? It shouldn't. It seems almost contradictory to me in terms of what a decentralized exchange means. So this buzzword gets tossed out a lot, because if you think about it, if you call yourself, let's say, a decentralized exchange, and you're first to the punch, you're one of the first guys there, you get a lot of PR out of that. So there's a lot of misaligned incentives to sort of just bullshit your way and say, I'm a decentralized exchange, even though we're really not. So this is one of the examples. What's another good example? Let's talk about Stellar. Stellar recently launched a decentralized exchange. Now, I don't know anything about their decentralized exchange in terms of how it works, but I know how the assets get onto the decentralized exchange because they work very similarly to how BitShares handled these assets. And so the way it works is you have an authority who issues the collateralized asset onto the Stellar decentralized exchange. So, for example, we have a custodian. To give you an example of using BitShares, you have OpenLedger. You give them Bitcoin, and they give you an asset on the BitShares blockchain called OpenBTC. And it's an asset that is one-to-one backed against BTC. Okay, so sounds great so far, right? You've gotten your asset, you're on the decentralized exchange, you can freely trade your BTC on BitShares. Okay, so here's where the problem comes. What happens when you're ready to exit from the platform and you want to move back into your native asset of Bitcoin or your native asset of Ethereum? Okay, well, now you have to go through the same custodian again. And what happens when this custodian refuses to process you exiting the system? You're kind of stuck. And worst of all, you don't have fungibility. So it's like, not only are you stuck, but you're identified at this point. So it's like, for lack of better words, you're fucked. So there's a lot of misunderstandings in terms of what this term decentralization means. And I feel like it's used a lot nowadays for PR purposes, and the general public is very confused about this. And the general public, they're not coders. They're not people that are tech literate. They have a very vague understanding of how all this stuff works. And worst of all is, like, the media coverage that's supposed to cover this absolutely butchers it in terms of the articles that they put out. So there's misinformation everywhere, and there really isn't a good source that's just like a go-to. So I think the worst part about it is, like, I am calling attention to these problems, but, like, I don't have a good solution. So, I mean, I just feel like it's something people need to be aware of. Just because something's decentralized, quote, quote, doesn't mean it's decentralized. So just don't make assumptions. Just because it's on a blockchain doesn't make it decentralized. So I think that's about my rant that I had to go on about decentralization. And it just frustrates me a lot because with the project that I work on, Novosphere and Atmos, two of the biggest things that I strive for are the ability to self-host all the content and to be able to do things in a way that you're not reliant on the services that we provide, so that you can always access information yourself without relying on anyone. And a lot of, I feel, projects are more than willing to sell bullshit to their users because it's good for PR, and it's good for money, and it's good for marketing and building rep and all that other stuff, because everyone wants to be crypto famous. There's a lot of projects that claim to be decentralized, and yet they rely on software that's closed source, or they rely on software that's open source but not up to date, or they rely on software that's open source that keeps track of certain states that when you self-host, you don't have those state variables. So there's information loss when you switch from one host to another host. So, yeah, that's my rant. So if anyone has anything else we want to talk about, now we can sort of go on a detour. You guys can feel free to talk on microphone now if you want to, by the way.
We got to pull the mic. So what's up, man?
Not much. Just giving a rant about decentralization.
That was great, and a lot of people don't know this information, and the fact that you're educating us, it'll be, like a ripple effect. Then we'll go educate other people, and so on and so forth. Education is the way to get to people.
Yeah, I agree. The problem is that it's very hard when you have conflicting sources saying certain things. There's a lot of information to sift through, and the majority of people aren't always, or sorry, I shouldn't say the majority. The bigger group, majority, are not always right about how they evaluate a project. And a lot of people, especially in crypto, have misaligned financial incentives. So they are financially incentivized to sell you bullshit about a project that they are invested in.
Right. Let me. Is it okay? If I bring up another project, that we were talking about earlier, by saying what you said?
like I said I wasn't going to say any names, but you can go ahead and bring up projects if you want.
Right, dude, I've never bought into Vitalik's wet dream. So,
Okay, elaborate.
but that aside, and I hate it. I hate tokens. I hate the fact that tokens are you have no choice but to use the mother chain. I mean, I really don't see how that's decentralized when you're dependent on another chain, right? I mean, God forbid, ETH dies one day for whatever reason, goes to a halt. The chain comes to a halt. Imagine how many projects are going to suffer. It's going to be like a 50 times Mt. Gox situation.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand what you mean by that. I'm assuming what you're saying is the side chains that are building on Ethereum are all subject to the mercy of Ethereum itself, which is entirely correct. And actually, this is something that Dan from EOS had previously talked about. Now, conversely, which is something that I think he skips over, is you have essentially that same problem in EOS. And I think right now this is a more blaring problem for EOS than it is for Ethereum, which is even if you build sidechains to EOS, the actual main chain itself has problems going on in terms of governance. And if these problems can't get resolved, now I think they will, but if they can't get resolved, then that's a lot of big problems, and that will inevitably affect all the sidechain projects for EOS. So you do have a risk in the sense that when these projects build on some underlying architecture, if that architecture collapses, you have a lot of bad things that happen. I think a good comparison might be, for example, in traditional investments, right? When the U.S. is doing badly, the whole world feels it. And that's because we're all interlinked because of globalization. So.
I think what we need is a better alert system to wake people up to these meetings, so they could participate live like us. So maybe we could get some type of sign up, because we got quite a few people in here that should be in here.
All the meetups are the same time every week, Monday. It started 40 minutes from now. So we invite people to come out, and hopefully the meetings continue to grow.
You can send the message to everybody, possibly saying, well, you know what? I hate when people do that. It's like fucking spam.
Yeah, there are people who there are bots that will join Discord and mass message everyone. It happens all the time, and as soon as I get one of those messages, I always just ban them straight from the Atmos Discord, because I assume that they are just a bot. So I'd rather not do that myself personally. I tend to just stick to putting announcements and
so let's
at everyone.
Well, let's get an alert system, maybe an email alert system, or some type of more anonymous type alert system, or maybe something more in synergy with the forum, right? And then
we should post it on the forum ahead of time as well. I mean, it's not like these meetings are spontaneous by any means, right? They're on a fixed schedule. They happen the same time every week. So
I want more people to participate. There's a lot of investors, so there's a lot of people here. And you look on the right side of Discord. How many people are in here? Definitely a few hundred.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely.
All right, so I'm gonna do it tonight, man. I know I've been saying I'm gonna do it, but I'll get my videos on IPFS tonight. Maybe we should set up a request system. Oh, we got the request system, right? I'll play with the site more tonight. I just haven't had time.
Sure, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in the Discord or to message me, and I'm happy to help answer. give you any clarification that you need.
And if you guys want anything, just send me a message. I'll download it for you. I gotta upload all my shows to PodPFS, so it's kind of a two things in one type of deal.
Okay, do you guys have anything else you guys want me to go over while we still have this meeting going?
Nah, bro, but good. I gotta say, like, kudos to you for staying in touch with the community, because that's where most projects go wrong. You know, like projects like Waves, you know, where Sasha kind of disassociated himself from the community, and then everybody, you know, kind of lost what's the morale, maybe, right? Is that the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, I haven't followed too much what's happened in Waves, so but I completely understand what you're saying. I feel like a lot of developers in general tend to lack good communication in terms of communicating across several mediums in terms of with people following their project. And a lot of developers tend to sort of retreat to an isolated location, so like be it a Discord or a Slack. But it's really important that even if they are in an isolated location, that their community can still engage with the developers to get an understanding of what's going on in the project and ask questions and interact.
Really great meeting. I just have one other question, which was what's going on with Code Blue?
Yeah, so I had talked with him last week, and I actually have a meeting with him scheduled after whenever we're done here at this meetup to sort of talk with him about the stuff that we're working on. So we recently laid out sort of an idea of what's going on in terms of what he's building. So just to recap on that, it's supposed to be an anime streaming service, and the way that streaming service works is it uses data from Novosphere DB, very similarly to how ES4 works. So we are looking this week to sort of post a roadmap for that. So the Trello that we have for the roadmap, there is I don't know what you call it, but it's like there's a column for it on the Trello, and that's going to get updated this week with sort of like the roadmap of what's going to be happening with that project. So does that answer your question, or was there something more specific you wanted me to answer? Okay, great. Anyone have anything else that you guys wanted me to go over? Any other questions before we wrap this up? Okay, I guess we'll leave it there. Thank you guys for coming out to this meeting. Great meeting. I hope to see you guys again next week.